Hello, and welcome to the Project Elected podcast. Project Elect is a nonpartisan nonprofit whose goal is pretty simple. We want to get more Latter-day Saint women involved in public service. On this podcast, we interview amazing Latter-day Saint women who are involved in public service. Hi, my name is Audrey Perry-Martin. I'm the founder of Project Elect and the host of this podcast. I am beyond excited today because I have a dear friend on the podcast, Becki Wright. Becki is this incredible powerhouse. She does everything. Her official title, though, is the founder and CEO of Proximity, which is a software company that makes it really easy to run for office, that I absolutely love her software. And she's developed this because she has so much campaign experience and especially working with women. And so I've been wanting to get her on this podcast forever, and I am so excited that she is here and we found a time that worked, and we are here to talk about all things campaign. So Becki, thank you so much for joining me today.
So excited to be here. Thank you.
So Becki, I want to start out. You've done so many things that we were just talking beforehand. We're like, okay, so what things are we going to talk about? But could you just give us a quick introduction of kind of your journey in public service and politics and all the things that you've done, or at least a highlight reel of the things that you've done?
Absolutely. I'm thrilled with Project Elect, and Audrey, I'm happy to be here. And I so follow the mission and believe in what you're trying to do here. And it's part of who I was and who I am today. So when a number of years ago, I actually ran for office myself. I ran for local office in my city. And despite using my paper maps and my Google Sheets, I ended up not winning. And I lost by 11 votes, which was a really painful experience when I felt like I had done everything right, but just really didn't have the tools and resources I needed to run. And I was doing it really not knowing what to do. And since that time, I actually started working on campaigns, worked for a number of different candidates as campaign manager, finance director, political operative, strategist on several different campaigns. And really, through that process, saw that even at some of the highest levels of office, when people are running for office, they had the same problems that I had when I ran for office, which was that the process can be complex. It can be difficult to navigate. And if you don't have an understanding of the changing landscape of campaigns, it's really difficult to find success. Even if you're a great leader, there are different things that you need to do when you're running for office. And so I built Proximity as a solution to this problem that I had myself and I saw as an operative, and built it really to simplify operations and to help campaigns, help elected leaders, help any kind of political leader connect with their constituents, with their voters, and do that in a way that is natural and normal. So we're really happy that we have Proximity out here. We've been around for a couple of years here, and we're expanded into north, south, east, west of the nation. We have candidates across the nation. Happy to be serving them, and I'm happy to be supporting women, especially. We don't only support women, but we're always happy to support women. And I personally am on the board of Utah Women Run, and that's such a passion of mine. So helping women come understand how to run, that's important. I'm also on Boulder Way Forward's area of political leadership for women. It's a passion of mine, and I'm really pleased to be here today.
Like I said, you're involved in everything. And you guys have done such incredible things with Utah Women Run and Boulder Way Forward, and just all of the incredible things you're doing to help, especially women run. We've talked about this a lot in the past, Becki, but women sometimes struggle to want to put themselves out there and run. Do you have advice or a way of looking at things that kind of helps you when you're trying to encourage a woman to run for office?
Absolutely. So women, obviously, we know we make up 51% of the population. We only hold 28% of elected positions. But one thing that women don't understand is that when women run for office, they win at the same rate as men, but they don't run nearly as often. The Center for American Women in Politics shows that research that they tend to win at the same rates, but there's fewer women that enter. And when we do enter, because there are fewer women that are actually running for office, there's this higher level of scrutiny that occurs. And so sometimes we have these stories where women say, I felt so scrutinized. And we know in our society, there's all kinds of things that women have to deal with, what they look like and how their voice sounds and all of these different things. And that's really frustrating. But I would say that the research does show that as we continue to show up, as we continue to run, we continue to win. And so I would always encourage anyone who's trying to think through this. If you're thinking about running, the odds aren't against you. They're waiting for you. They're waiting for you to step up. They're waiting for you to jump in. And it's not going to be easy. I won't say that it's going to be just a walk in the park, but I will say that we need more women running, more women just in that pipeline, flooding that pipeline, because we're leaders and women need to see themselves as leaders.
So when when they finally decide to run for office, how do they tell their story? How do they capture the voters and make them feel a part of their campaign? What's the best way that you've seen to do that?
Politics and campaigning often gets reduced to numbers, polling, fundraising, votes. But at its core, a campaign is a storytelling machine. The power of a narrative is something that can never be lost. And we see that time and again with winning campaigns, that power of a narrative, those values, that vision, all of those things that you can use to connect with voters are so much more powerful. So I always encourage women to ask themselves, why are you running? Not just the policy, but the personal reason. What's at stake? Why does this moment matter now? And then how will you change things if you win? One of the things that's really cool about campaigns is because campaigns are storytelling machines and you really need that authenticity to connect with voters. Women's superpower is connection. Women's superpower is authenticity. Women are excellent storytellers. Think of all the women that you know when your friend calls you up and she's like telling you this story and it's fantastic. Women tend to be less scripted. They tend to be more relational. And so see that as one of your superpowers. See that as a way that you can connect and have that authentic storytelling that matters in campaigns.
I love how you put that because I feel like a lot of women, when they're running for office, they feel like they have to fit this certain mold and they have to be very scripted and they have to have these specific campaign points and things that they say over and over again. And that doesn't really appeal to women as much because we are, for the most part, more relationship and communication and storytelling. And so when you say that's your superpower, use it, I think that's so important to tell to women who are running for office because they are figuring out how to tell their story and connect with voters, which is really why people win. And you and I have both worked on a lot of campaigns and know that you're not going to win an election unless you connect with the voters and unless they feel like they like you and understand your story and where you're coming from and trust you. That is an incredible superpower women have. And instead of trying to fit the mold of a staunchy candidate or whatever that they're used to seeing, use that connection, use that power. Can you give me an example of someone you've seen who does that really well?
Yeah. And just to follow up with that, Audrey, before we jump into that, one of the things that sometimes women make mistakes on is they do feel like they have to fit a certain way. And I will say we are under more scrutiny by how we look and by how our voice sounds. That's documented. That's research. We know that happens. But again, as we have more and more women in this process of running for office, that will become more and more normal and natural for people to see them as leaders. So my advice in that is to own your story. I started this whole podcast by telling you that I failed, that I lost my campaign by 11 votes. I own that story. It's part of my success. That is a stepping stone to my success. I even saw a man who, after running for Senate, he signed all his emails, U.S. Senate candidate. He didn't win. He was proud of the fact that he had run and even just done that. And so if we can own our story as women and not just think about only our successes, but our struggles and our personal experiences, that allows voters to connect with us. One of the things that I think has been really great about this is in Utah, actually, Deidre Henderson is lieutenant governor here in Utah. And while she was a running mate of Governor Cox, she talks about how she started by working on a campaign, not knowing a thing about how to run. And she drank from the fire hose and understood so much more. She talked about how she was in the PTA, how she cared about the arts, and how because of that and these small steps that she took, even though she didn't know what she was doing, she saw herself as a leader. She saw that she could do these things, and she owns that story when you talk with her. She talks about how she returned back, and now she created this program called Return Utah, where she's trying to encourage and help other women who've been out of the workforce or who have taken some time to raise kids to come back and participate as well. So I love that. I think she's a great example of that.
And it's so much easier to connect to people when you are being authentic and when you are telling your story and owning it. And I think that really is a key to making running for office easier.
It's a key for running for office. It's a key to actually legislating and getting things done. Going back to Lieutenant Governor Henderson, she actually was instrumental in helping pass a bill in Utah that provided additional protections for sexual assault survivors. And because she had a personal experience with a family member who did not have those protections, and there was a tragedy that occurred. But because of that personal experience, she was able to speak to that and able to legislate and able to encourage and push that policy forward. So think of it also like your story is going to continue with you. It's not just I'm creating this story for this tiny little moment in time where I'm going to run for office, but this is something that people want to see. They want to see that we have representative government, and they want to see that you're a real human, and that when you are in office too, you're going to represent them and show bring your whole self to the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially these days where it's really hard to tell what's true and what's not because there's just too much information, being able to connect and be authentic with voters is really what they're hungering for. We've talked about running and how to create the story, but there's more to winning a campaign than that. And your story of losing by 11 votes is so fantastic because it's like, oh, 11 votes. Like that's one or two households that you could have had get out to vote and vote for you. So Proximity, the software company you've started, that's what it's focused on, right? Is letting people figure this stuff out. So tell me a little bit about that and why it's important and how software or other tools can help with it.
As I mentioned, storytelling is a key factor of campaigns, and we don't want to just reduce campaigns to data and numbers. But with that said, data and numbers and technology are vital to have a winning campaign. Tech and digital strategy really have changed everything in the recent years. And campaigns are about more than just knocking doors and doing a stump speech. They're about understanding who the voter is, what matters to them, and reaching out to them. I remember before understanding campaigns, I thought, okay, just like get out the message to everyone that's in my city. And one of the problems that I actually made when I ran for city council is I thought my neighbor down the street, I assumed they were A, registered to vote, B, were active voters, and C, voted in an election that is similar to my election, in a municipal election. Those are simple things that people can do when they start running for office. They have to realize who are the actual people that are going to show up. And knowing that voter and understanding that voter is best done through lists and data and demographics, a voter file, all of these things. And that takes a little bit to manage all of that. Using tools and technologies to organize that campaign, to simplify, to make it more efficient, allows you to be a better candidate. I sometimes like to break it down into these three basic things that campaigns are governed by. One, they're governed by your geography. Where is your district and who in your district is registered to vote? Two, they're governed by your timeline. You do not have Q4 to make it up. You have a deadline. You cannot come late. It has to happen at a certain time, whether you have a primary, or general, a special election, whatever it is, you only have a finite amount of time. And three, you have laws and rules around how much you can fundraise, when you have to turn that in, how you use your yard signs. Everything is all based on those three things. And if you get any one of those three things wrong, then likely you're not going to have a winning campaign, or you may even be disqualified from running for office. So having data, having tools, having software to organize all of that and to simplify all of that is vital. In the last campaign that I worked, we used 6 different software programs, and none of the data talked to each other. And I was so frustrated because I was the finance director for a statewide Senate campaign, and I couldn't figure out who had attended the event, who had opened the email, who was donating, who was an active voter. All of those things were set in different areas. And so Proximity aggregates all of that data into one source so that you as a candidate, you as the operative, as a team, can come together and say, oh, I see how we're connecting with this voter. I see what is important to this voter and how we can continue to connect with them. So that's part of the changing game of campaigns, is just truly doing things faster, doing things better, connecting in a more meaningful way with your voters, and doing it in a way that's not going to break any one of those three constraints that you have around your campaign.
I really like how you kind of just break that down, make it understandable. I've been in politics long enough that every 4 years in a presidential election cycle, the first one that I've really watched was 2000 election, right? And the technology has completely changed. Like where we were in 2008, I was on the first Romney campaign, and then 2012, the second one. And then I'm always involved, and the tech is just, it's been incredible how it's changed campaigns and the opportunities that are available and the information that's available to candidates, even municipal candidates, that was never there before. You were operating pretty blind back in the day, just 10 years ago. And now there's just so much information that is almost information overload. And bringing it all together and breaking it down that these are the three things that you really need to worry about and structure your campaign around, I think is extremely helpful.
To that point too, Audrey, when you're running in a municipal campaign, you likely don't have a very sophisticated team. There are some municipal campaigns that will, but the vast majority of races in this election year are going to be down ballot races in local districts. That means that the most common campaign team structure is probably candidate, maybe a spouse, and a couple volunteers. Max, like that. For a lot of a very common campaign team is something like that. You may decide to hire a campaign manager, or you may decide to have a consultant here or there, but really you're like the one woman show or part of a very small team. And so having a tool that can help you to organize everything is actually really vital too. Because you have to make sense of all of the data, as you mentioned. You aggregate all of that, you bring it together, but then you need to parse out what's important, what's valuable, where do I need to spend my time? And that concept of having a limited amount of time is vital. You can't do everything. I always tell people, one of the key things that I say to any candidate who's thinking of running is I say, make sure that you do things only a candidate can do. There are things you're going to want to do. There are things you might be good at. But guess what? If you can get your spouse, your friend, your volunteer to do those things, and you do what only the candidate can do, you're going to be far more successful. There are things that a volunteer and that other people can't do that you alone have to do. And if you waste your time and have that limited amount of time and waste it on things that don't matter, like fixing your website, I'm sorry, but someone else can do that for you. You're going to actually run out of time to connect with people.
That's really good advice, because that's what bigger campaigns are all about, is managing the candidate's time. And it's municipal and smaller elections don't necessarily have someone or multiple people scheduling there every minute and telling them exactly where they need to be for the highest impact and all of those things. But you still have to consider it. And you're right. Don't be doing databases and fixing your website when somebody else can do it. You need to be meeting people and talking to people and going to events and being the face of the campaign, because that's how you're going to meet people and get them to trust you.
And with proximity, our goal was to simplify it so much that they spend less time behind the computer and more time out. And any tool you choose, whatever tool you choose, you should recognize, I don't need to be spending my campaign just behind the computer. I need to be spending my campaign however I can. It could be a digital outreach. You could do digital outreach, but you need to be out in there either digitally or in person with those people that are going to vote.
Okay, so you are also, just switching gears a little bit, a fundraising expert. And I know that is, for me, I'm terrible at fundraising. I'm scared of fundraising. That's what scares me the most. So can you just give some tips for how to fundraise?
So the reality is that campaigns cost money. That's a reality. It's the reality of our world. And so even if you're like, I don't really want to spend money, I don't really want to fundraise, then what you're saying is, I don't really want to campaign, because you can't just have yard signs and mailers. They don't just appear out of thin air. And if you have more complex spending, digital ads or radio ads, those all cost money. So that's the reality. So first of all, the first things first, when you're running for office, you recognize the reality is this is going to cost money. The second thing about fundraising that you need to understand, some of the candidates could potentially self-finance the campaign. That is an option for some people. However, what that does is it creates this view that the candidate is buying the office. People don't like to see that. They don't like to see a candidate self-funding their campaign. It feels like weird to people. That's why you ask people for money. So just know those things. That's the framework. The third thing that you need to understand about this framework is that people want to feel part of something. A lot of people are going to, your story, your message is going to resonate with them. They're going to be so happy. They're going to be like, yes, I love that person. I want that person to win. And they're also going to think, I don't want to run. I don't want to be the person up there. I don't want to deal with it. And so you can give them an opportunity to feel part of something. So asking them for a contribution is a small way that they can say, I'm so glad I'm not running. I'm so glad that she's running instead. And I'm so glad that I connect and I resonate with what she has to say. So just in your mind, change your mindset of this is yucky. People don't want to be asked for money. Think of it as you are denying them the opportunity to feel part of something if you don't ask them for money. So this is the framework, right? Now, when you're structuring an ask, you need to do a few things that are very important. One, you need specificity. If you just say, hey, I just need you to donate, let's just do this, everyone's like, I don't really, who cares? If you say, hey, we have to get more yard signs. Everything has gone through. We've gone through all our yard signs. We're thrilled, but we need to keep our message going out. Or I have a mailer that needs to come. I'm specific. I'm specific about where you're going to use the money and what you're going to do with it. And then you need to be urgent. You need to have an urgency. So specificity and urgency. If you say, yeah, like just give me money at some point, whenever you want to, that's not going to encourage people to move to action. If you say, we are purchasing yard signs the end of this week, we've got to raise this money, and this is why. Then what they've said is, I want to be part of a team. I know how it's going to be used, and I know when it's going to be used. And people love that specificity, that urgency, and they love feeling part of that team. So when you structure your asks, make sure that you're doing those things. You're helping them see what you need, when you need it, and then how you're going to use it. How will things change if they donate? How will they be part of it? How are you going to continue to share that message? Those are the basics of fundraising, on creating a message and recognizing you need people to help and support you. Above that, I would say that almost every time that you talk with someone, you should be asking for their support. You could ask for their support in either their time, in either a connection or an introduction, or asking for their support financially. If you as a candidate are talking with someone and you see that connection and you feel that, and you're not asking them to do something for you, you're missing out on an opportunity to build your team, to get your impact just growing and expanding. So just in your mind, keep that in mind. Recognize people want to be part of this team. They want to support you, and let them do that.
Yeah. Let them support you. Let them give you money. They want to.
Yes.
That's the attitude. I love it. So on another kind of switching gears a little bit, you're really passionate about this and you have such drive to make a difference, both making it easier for everybody to run, especially making it easier for women to run, encouraging them to run, teaching them how to run. Where does that come from? And on the spiritual side of things, have you ever had some sort of confirmation that you should do something or get involved in public service? And how has that worked for you? And how does that kind of tie into your religious beliefs?
I grew up with 6 older brothers. And I was the 7th of 8 children. I have a little sister. And my whole life, there has been something, I believe it's a spiritual gift, but there's been something imbued in me that I have felt like women need to show up. They need to lead. And that I have the opportunity to help and support women doing that. It's literally since when I think I was 8 or 10 years old. And even though I was surrounded by boys, we were hiking, biking, sports, I was always doing that kind of thing, you name it. It was around 8 or 10 that I created our neighborhood's first girls club, complete with our butcher paper charter and handprint signatures. And we had so much fun. I've always felt a draw and a connection to women. I've always been just anxious to know my place in the eyes of our Heavenly Father. And I've been happy and pleased to know and learn more about our Heavenly Mother and understand why God wants me to show up. Why does He need my unique voice? And I think that's because, from a spiritual standpoint, He needs all of us. We are His children, but He needs the perspectives of everyone. And I struggled at times growing up feeling like I didn't always feel like I fit in with female personality traits. I'm pretty assertive. I like to lead. I'm a tall person. I'm not like physically a smaller like most women are. So I've always felt this, do I belong? How do I belong? Where do I belong? And how does God see me? And it's been great to see through this process, instead of shrinking, because I feel like the feeling and the desire that we ever have to shrink or to retreat is not from God. That's never from God. That feeling of, oh, like she's being bossy or she's being too much, that's actually not from God. That's actually somebody else saying, don't be your full potential. Hide your light under a bushel. Don't use your spiritual gifts. And it actually took a number of years until in my adulthood where I realized like my spiritual gifts are not my mom's spiritual gifts. I love my mother and she's fantastic. And I am so grateful and lucky to have been raised in a wonderful household where my parents raised us to believe in the gospel. They raised us to have pretty traditional gender roles. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm very happy and pleased about that. But it's never been what has fit for me. And so it took until my adulthood to realize your spiritual gift is actually strategy. Your spiritual gift is leading. Your spiritual gift is not being afraid to stand up in front of a room. Those are things that I have been given and I have had to work on. I always say our strengths are our weaknesses are our strengths. So if we go too far in one direction, they can be a weakness. But if we recognize that they can be our strength and we recognize they're given from God and that we use them to glorify God, then those are strengths that we can have. So I've had that passion and that understanding throughout my life, but been able to hone that in my adulthood. And that experience has just made me even more like I desire even more to help other women see themselves in that way, to help women see themselves as leader, to recognize that their spiritual gifts are not just based in one thing that maybe someone wants them to do or thinks they should do, that actually we need perspectives from all kind of people.
We absolutely do. And I love that. And I appreciate you sharing that and your backstory and that journey, because that's not always easy. I had 2 brothers under me and then 3 sisters, but I was a lot older than them and I always was playing with the boys too. And I didn't always feel like I fit in with the girls either, and because I wanted to do other things. And it's wonderful the way you say it, that it's a spiritual gift and these are the things you've been given and you're using them to the best of your ability to build the kingdom and follow what God wants you to do. And I love that.
Thank you. And I'm sure you probably shared it on this podcast, but I distinctly remember hearing several times. First of all, I remember the talk by our prophet before he was the prophet, asking women to step up, to understand what it takes to lead, to administer, to organize, to do all of these things. I think it's called a plea to my sisters. He pleads with us. He says, we actually need you. And I think there's so much that we could say about cultural expectations inside the church and outside of the church, and sometimes how we put those own expectations on ourselves. And those aren't necessarily expectations or things that are from God necessarily. He's asked us to step up. And why are things a certain way? Maybe because we haven't stepped up. We need to step up. We need to say, here I am. Let me be an instrument in your hand. Let me lead. Let me understand how to organize. And then a number of other general conference talks and encouragements to be involved in politics and to show up in ways that allow for civil discourse. That's another huge passion of mine, is to recognize that there's not one way of thinking and that we can disagree and we can do it in a way that is civil and dignified. So that whole concept of being involved in politics and seeing women as leaders is something that our prophet has pleaded with us to do. And I see it as an answer to the call to say, yep, we're going to show up. We're going to do what the Lord has asked us to do.
You say that wonderfully. Plea to My Sisters is obviously one of my favorite talks, but I think we should link it in this podcast again, even though we shared it before, because it is just, it's so clear President Nelson just asking us to step up. And then you look at all the other recent General Conference talks about getting involved civically and being like the peacemaker and being the one who helps the civil discourse and involved in your communities in any way you can and serving in that way. And I really think we're good at service. The women of the church are good at service. We're fantastic at it.
Yes.
But we're not great.
And organizing.
Yes, and organizing. But we're not great at service outside of our families and our church and like our schools. I think we're really limiting ourselves. And I think our church leaders have been saying, don't limit yourself like this. You need to broaden it. You need to go bigger. These skills were given to you for a reason, and you're needed right now in this world.
Absolutely. And I would even add to that, when our prophet, when he asked us to do all of these things, and then we've had all these other supporting requests to be involved in politics, we don't just need women in office. We absolutely do. We need more women for running for office. We need women shaping the whole process. Beyond candidates, we need women as campaign managers. We need women as operatives, strategists, movement leaders. If you don't want to run yet, see what it takes. What are you passionate about? Learn how to lead. See yourself as a leader. Help someone else get to be a leader. And you'll see, if you feel like you need a little bit of experience, you'll see that process and say, actually, I could do that. I could actually do that just like this guy could do it. So the future of women in politics is in elected offices, but in that whole process as well. I want to make sure that we have that focus of getting women on the ballot, but also the focus of women being part of that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got 3 daughters, and 2 of them are in Young Women, and I've been in Young Women on and off. And I love the church program where the young women are teaching the lessons and they're planning the activities. And it's just so clear to me that the church wants these girls to be leaders in the world. And they're training them from the time they're very young to be leaders. And it's incredible to me to watch these young girls and how confident they are and how they can just get up and teach a lesson at 11 years old. And it's just so amazing to watch how the church is telling us and showing us and teaching us all at the same time that we need to step up. And so I think it's so important, and we should talk about it all the time.
We should. And it's actually like such a beautiful training ground, not only in Young Women's, but even just saying, can you give a talk in church? Like, some people, we take lightly the fact that we've been trained throughout childhood all the way through adulthood, how to speak in front of people, how to plan an event, how to manage a budget, how to invite and encourage people to come and show up. These are skills that work and translate perfectly to campaigns, to leadership, to women in politics. And so absolutely, that's something that not everyone has that opportunity to have. And so let's utilize that.
Yeah. Do you have an invitation for our listeners or something that you could ask them to do now, right away, to prepare themselves to take this step into the public sphere?
My last message would be that no one wins alone. No one wins a campaign by standing alone, by not showing up and putting themselves out there, by trying to do everything all at once. Sometimes some women have some problems with delegation or letting people help them, or all of these things. Recognize that you have unique gifts and talents. You have the call to serve and to lead, and you can do it if you surround yourself with people who believe in you. And if you say to yourself, I can do this, I can just get the right people around me. Let me find my friend who trusts me and believes in me. Let's figure this out. And if you're not ready to run, you can be that person for someone else. You can encourage, mentor, volunteer, support someone who's running. I would just, with all my heart, encourage women to be involved in that process, whether they're in the supportive role or if they see themselves and they're ready and the time is right for them to lead. Take that step. Know that it is your opportunity and it's God's plan for you to lead.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, Becki. Thanks for being here and taking the time to chat with us and sharing your extreme amounts of knowledge. And we will talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you all for listening to the Project Elected podcast. For free resources and materials, head over to projectelectwomen.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as Project Elect Women. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate us, or give us a review on iTunes. So until next time, thank you.